Welcome to Unplanned and Untold, a podcast that dives into the real-life, unexpected twists of facing an unplanned pregnancy in college. Join us as we listen to the unplanned and untold stories of those who have overcome the odds in order to achieve their goals. Welcome back to another episode of Unplanned and Untold. I'm your host, Caitlin Willing, and today's podcast, we have such an amazing story to share with you. You're about to meet a woman who has defied every single odd that's been thrown at her and continued to persevere. And just thank you so much, Natalie, for coming onto the podcast and being so willing to share your story with our listeners.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So Natalie, take me back. We all know that the common denominator in this podcast are women who've experienced unplanned pregnancies. So there's no shock when it comes to what we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
But take me back a little bit. Where did you grow up? What was life like before you went to college?
Well, I grew up in Alabama. Majority of my life was on the coast, close to Mobile. It was like Daphne and Fairhope, which are communities close to Mobile, which is the major city there. So I spent most of my life in that area. I also live in Birmingham, another city in Alabama, for a little while too.
Awesome. And what universities did you apply to?
Oh gosh, that's so hard. Hard to recall. It's been so many years. I don't know if I applied to any of them besides Auburn, which is where I ended up going my freshman year.
Okay.
Partly that was also because I ended up, I have a sister who's a couple years older.
Okay.
And she decided to transfer there. And so I said, this would be great. We can both go to Auburn and be roommates. So that's what we did.
Oh my gosh, that is so sweet. So you ended up going to Auburn. Yes. And in what part of your journey did you find out you had an unplanned pregnancy?
My freshman year. So yes,
baby on campus.
I was a baby. I had only been in school for a few months, and it's totally unexpected. And I was 18 at the time.
Oh my God.
So yeah, it was a total shock.
How did you end up finding out? Did you kind of suspect, or what did that look like for you?
Yeah, I don't remember the exact details, but I think my period was late. And so I decided I remember when I took the test, I was at my apartment. And so I decided to take a pregnancy test. And lo and behold, it was positive. I then didn't go to the doctor to confirm. It's like, maybe this is, I was young too. I'm like, maybe it's not right.
We all go through that. Out of everything we remember the day we took the test and what that was like. And then I feel like our backup thought is surely not. We need to make sure that this is correct. So you end up going to the doctor. Who did you tell initially that you were pregnant?
I don't know if I told my sister or my boyfriend first.
Gotcha.
It's been now 25 years. So it's kind of blurry. I think I did tell my boyfriend, the father of our at the time first. Now I remember. And luckily we were in a new relationship. Wow. It was, puppy love phase. And luckily he took it very well and was just supportive, saying, we were both pro-choice, and I knew that about him and he knew that about me. But he just said, whatever, ultimately it's your choice, but I'm going to support your decision.
Wow. At 18 years old. He was young like you.
Yeah, he was 19.
19 still, baby.
But also he was very mature for his age.
Wow.
And like I said, we had only been together for a few months at the time. But ultimately, I had to make because I, even being so young, I knew like I can't, depend on this relationship to make this decision. So I had to ultimately make it how I was going to proceed just based on, looking at my own future at the time.
Sure. So in that moment when you decided you were going to stay in school and parent, what were some factors that played into that decision? I mean, you're so young. That's such a brave decision. You just started college and you still dreamed of finishing. You wanted that. So talk to me a little bit about that thought process.
Yeah, it was probably a little bit naive. but also I think just maybe tenacity. But I was already, there wasn't any question in my mind that I was going to finish school. I mean, I'd say might have been naive, but I'm like, this is something that's kind of was drilled into me as growing up as a child. That's your, that's the path. You have to go, go to college. And not saying that that's necessarily true, but that's what I believed.
Sure.
And so, to kind of naive, I thought, I'll figure this out.
Right.
I was working already at the time. I was already financially supporting myself and going to school. So I wasn't relying on anyone else already. And so I remember that just, actually, I can't remember if it was over a week or so, really trying to figure out what I should do. But I was working at the time. And I just remember thinking through everything, like what would be the reasons that I wouldn't, have this child and stay in school. And really, this was just a young thought, like really just because I want to party and, live the college life. Which is totally understandable. And I did miss out on having that young experience. But I just remember thinking to myself that wasn't a good enough reason for me. At the time. So that was pretty much what I decided. I really didn't know how I was going to make it work. But I knew that that's what I wanted to do. So,
wow, really cool. And with your parents, did you end up telling them, and what was their reaction?
I did tell them. My parents were divorced. They had been since I was, tiny. I told them separately, but they were both just supportive. And I think it was the same. I mean, at least from my perspective, it was sort of like, you're already on your own. We will emotionally, they didn't have the means to really help me financially, but they emotionally supported me. And the same with Chuck. That was the father. His family was the same way. They were supportive, of our decision, but that was about it. Said, okay, like rock on, you
go for it.
Yeah, go for it.
Man. And I know not having financial support personally, having an unplanned pregnancy is really hard. Yeah. And there were a lot of low moments in my life having to navigate that. And so I'm sure without financial help from your parents or Chuck's parents, y'all hit a lot of hurdles along the way. So talk to me about what that looked like, two young college students figuring this out by themselves.
Yeah, it was extremely difficult. I mean, we decided to leave Auburn, just because we knew that, because pretty much the entire population of students and the wages that are offered there were minimum wage jobs, because it wasn't a competitive market. And so we decided to leave at the end of freshman year and move to Birmingham, which Chuck also grew up there and had connections. So we moved there and got an apartment, and luckily for me, Chuck was really resourceful. He was working full time. We were both going to school. He also, we moved to this apartment, and he was able to, made friends with the apartment owner. It was a small, historical complex, and he ended up being the apartment manager. And so we got reduced rent. But even with all of that, it was a constant struggle. We had, we both had student loans, and with massive amounts of student loans. I remember getting sort of payday loans and high interest credit cards. It was pretty much always like living, more than just paycheck to paycheck, and trying to make it work. For the longest time, we had one vehicle. So trying to both work and go to school, take care of a child. It was, just a juggling act to make that happen. And we didn't have childcare for the longest time, or not really. Because we didn't have the finances, we were doing preschool, Mother's Day out type programs.
A few hours here and there that you can afford. I remember those days.
Yeah. And so, really doing anything we could to, piece it together. But it took us years before I think we were sort of felt like we could breathe,
Okay.
years and years,
Yes.
um, to
So
where we were stable.
you ended up graduating at some point.
Hmm.
Okay. What did you graduate with?
I did. I got my undergraduate degree in psychology, and
Awesome.
then I went on. I worked for a year after that in conducting research, and then I really enjoyed it, and I continued on and got a master's in clinical psychology.
How, girl? How? You were determined as all get out, even without financial support, that you wanted to go ahead and get that master's.
Yeah, and I was but sort of prepping for our conversation, I was like, because I don't think about that time a lot.
Right.
But it was the most I think the graduate school year, a couple of years, were the most rewarding for me personally, academically, challenging myself, but they were the hardest. It was the hardest time of my life.
What made them so
I
hard?
Because we were, I was in school doing clinical program. I was working, doing research. We didn't live close to campus, so I was
Okay.
commuting about an hour each way every day.
Oh my word.
And I was, operating on very limited sleep, a few hours,
Sure.
a night, I think.
Wow.
I ended up just having some of my own like physical symptoms because of the stress that I was under doing that. And then it's a whole other story, but at the same time, Chuck, we had been married at this time. We got married a year
Right.
after, about a little bit before our son was a year old. But
Okay.
he developed a medical condition which was undiagnosed and was repeated during grad school, and was repeatedly in the hospital for that. And so just sort of anything you can imagine that is a
Right.
life stressor, we were enduring at that time. And I also just sort of had and probably still do, somewhat of a perfectionistic tendency.
Yeah.
And so I also I wouldn't cut myself any slack,
Mm-hmm.
when it came to my classes or grades. And so, I'm like, I've got to do it all. And luckily I had a really good grad school mentor, and now someone who's now my friend, who was like, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to do it all. Like, you know, and just hearing that from from someone else who I looked up to was helpful to say, like, I can get a B. I didn't end
Right.
up getting any B's, but just knowing that it was okay if I
But you were
did.
given permission just in
Given
case.
permission, just in case
Oh my
um,
gosh. Even the fact that you and Chuck stayed together and got married after, meeting each other so young, having an unplanned pregnancy, and having zero financial resources and just building that life together from the ground up. That alone defies so many odds in today's
yeah,
world.
yeah.
And then add on top of that you're in school and then grad school and juggling that with a baby, and then also juggling Chuck being in and out of the hospital. Take me a little bit down that road. What was that like?
It was stressful because he was so sick, and we had no idea what he was experiencing. And
Okay.
I think it took a couple of years for us to figure it out. And luckily, I was in grad school. I was at the University of South Alabama, and there was a medical school there and a team that was
Okay.
doing research, actually on the condition it ended that he had. And so I remember being a researcher, I was researching as much as I can, like trying to put symptoms together. And I read about something that really sounded like what he was experiencing.
Okay.
And I found the experts on campus and connected them. And he went to see them. And finally, he was able to get medication that managed his symptoms. So
Okay.
we were really fortunate. But he was set in and out of the hospital and the ER all the time, and trying to do that with a child. Our son was about like preschool, kindergarten age
Okay.
during that time.
Oh my word. So still a lot. And when do you graduate from, with your master's degree? When did that come into the picture?
I graduated in it was in 2005.
Okay.
So I graduated undergrad 2002, grad school 2005. So it wasn't too far off.
Not bad. No.
Yeah, I took like sort of it would have been an extra year for my undergrad, as far as, and also I transferred, lost some credits, but I started in 1997.
Okay.
And graduated 2002, and then I worked for a year, and then did grad school for a couple of years. So, and then Chuck, it took a longer road. He ended up getting 2 associate degrees over the years, in business and construction management.
Okay.
That's what he ultimately did, was in construction management type field, but his was a little bit of a longer route.
Yes, I can only imagine.
Yeah, and we ended up having another child together. Our kids were 11 years apart.
Okay.
So we had a daughter 11 years later too. So
okay. Oh my gosh, so sweet. And I know something tragic did happen with Chuck. Are you willing to share a little bit about that chapter in your life?
Sure. It's not completely related, but I think so. In March of 2016, after we'd been together for about almost 18 years, he died by suicide.
Oh my goodness.
So there's one thing about suicide is there is no one reason why.
Sure.
It's a constellation of factors that lead someone to die by suicide. But I think one big precipitating factor is he did suffer from chronic pain and health conditions for a long time.
Yes.
And I think it was such a strain on him, and in addition to other factors,
right.
The personal experiences that people have. But so yeah, in March of 2016, we lost him.
I'm so sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And our kids at the time were 6. Our daughter was 6 years old, and our son was 17.
I can't imagine, after all that y'all had overcome together, and then now this big incident. But I will say, you persevered. You continued to persevere to getting your undergrad, your graduate, your master's degree, and now you have a solid foundation, to stand on in the midst of all of this. I can only imagine how much harder it would have been had you not continued to persevere with school and your career. Do you feel like finishing all of that has helped give you some stability, some more stability than if you hadn't finished all of that educational degree?
Definitely. I mean, student loans they're horrible. I mean, I paid them. I was lucky just last year. Because I work for a university, that after paying for about 20 years, I got loan forgiveness.
Wow.
But I wouldn't have done it any other way. Like I would never have been where I am, professionally, financially. I can't imagine had I not made that decision. So I'm like, I would still, I'm so grateful for the loan forgiveness program, but I would, even if that didn't exist, I would not have changed anything. And I don't like to say that you have to have, hard life experiences to help you later on, but I do reflect on that after losing Chuck, because having gone through what we did, and really trying to, having to navigate all those situations and trying to find resources to help us, when we were young, and making things work, it put me into that. I'm a problem solver type.
Yes.
And I went into that mode after I lost him, because I had no idea. Really around the time he died, it felt like we had just made it. He was in his career for a few years, like really, something he really loved, and was doing really well financially.
Yes.
We were both like, we were in sort of our place. We also had just bought a brand new home a few months prior. A lot of things were changing in our lives for the good.
Right.
And so, those things don't usually coincide with someone taking or you don't think that they do, but those things don't necessarily, they don't really matter. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to really initially focus on, of course I was devastated, but I wasn't really able to focus on myself or my grief because I was worried about how am I going to survive?
Right.
How, how am I going to, survive financially? How am I
Right.
going to support our kids financially? How am I going to support them emotionally by
Mm-hmm.
myself? Because we were we were partners. I never saw my life without him. And
Right.
we worked together really easily. So, but but I think it kicked in. It's like you can't, you've done hard things. At least I said to myself, like
Yep.
I've done hard things before.
Yes.
Um, but it is sad. I think that sort of in both situations, um, at least from my self reflection, that it was so hard to tapped into resources, whether it be financial resources or just resources, community support that I
Mm-hmm.
needed in both times.
Right.
Being having an unplanned pregnancy in college, and then being a suicide loss survivor years
Right.
later.
Right.
There was a lot of parallel to those experiences of just feeling, wondering where the support was.
Yes. Absolutely. So, how did you originally hear about baby steps? What brought us to your attention?
um, it was someone shared it on social media, someone who also attended Auburn, and I'm like, this is so incredible. And so I listened to, some of the episodes, and it resonated so much that I was just excited to hear that something like that was going on, and also thinking that this needs to be everywhere.
Yes, absolutely. And so thinking back on all that you and Chuck overcame and just all of the struggles, which I can identify financially, it is a huge burden. Having an unplanned pregnancy alone is traumatic enough. And then once you don't have community support or financial support, it just makes that journey even harder in a different way, you know?
Yeah.
And so knowing what you know now about baby steps and the resources that we provide women on Auburn's campus and hopefully on campuses across the nation sometime soon, how do you think you and Chuck would have been impacted if baby steps had been around?
I think it would have been incredible because we wouldn't have just been, of course we were continuing education, but we were just so focused on surviving.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that I think that piece would have been, alleviated to a big extent. Same thing, we were really concerned about childcare. And we didn't, it took us, I think it was a couple years or more before we were able to figure out that subsidies existed for childcare and how to
Right.
get them.
How to
And I found,
navigate through it.
yeah, and I found that out from just a classmate who mentioned it. So I think just having the support and the network to know, what what do you do, where do you go, I would have been able to focus more on making decisions based on other things than just how am I going to get through school as fast as I can.
Right.
And maybe having other social support with other mothers in college. I was really isolated
Okay.
for a number of years. I didn't know anyone else
Yeah.
that was having a child, that had a child.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, that aspect was really hard. And so, Chuck and I pretty much, relied on each other for that social support, for good and bad, but it would
Sure.
have been nice to have other, network of people around us that were going through similar experiences.
Absolutely. And even, after the baby's born and they're in grade school and, they're growing up, I think a piece of the puzzle not a lot of women understand is you still long for those mom friends
Yeah.
that are in that same season of life. But because we started so young, our seasons don't quite match other moms.
Yeah.
I
I
tend
definitely felt that.
it kind of follows you, through the
Hmm.
years, especially with that firstborn being, happening so young in life where you're the youngest by far at all the T-ball games and people asking you when you take your child to the dentist or the doctor, if you're the mom or the nanny, or that isolation still kind of follows us a little bit throughout their lives. Just because there is an age difference from when children, normally are born to married couples and when
Yeah.
they're born early. So I'm still navigating that, girl. I still figuring
Yeah.
that one out as we go.
I remember this, I mean, that resonates so much. I remember having our daughter who was, 11 years younger,
Yes.
11 years later, and I was 30. And it felt like this felt so like, I know I fit in.
This is normal. I've
normal.
joined the normal club.
Yes, I'm normal for right now. This feels so good. But I was the same way. I mean, there were some times, 20 plus years difference in me and some of the other parents for my son, and constantly feeling just self-conscious about my age.
Absolutely. And so I would love to ask you one last question.
Okay.
If there was any type of advice that you could give a student mom, a young college student who's finding out she's pregnant, what would you say to her?
That's really hard. That's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't say to follow my path. I don't think I would have done it any differently, but it was extremely hard. But I would say to really go inward and sort of follow your own path. And but that, I mean, I think today with more resources and support, that it is possible to finish your college degree if that's what you want to do,
right.
and that it can make a huge difference in your life trajectory. Or at least for me, I know that it did. But I know it's a very personal decision.
Yes. Do you think you would be where you are today, with all of the tenacity and perseverance that you've brought to the table, had you not experienced that unplanned pregnancy prior?
Well, I don't know where life would have taken me,
right.
But I don't think so. I probably was a little bit that way before, but it definitely has changed the sort of outlook on how I perceive everything in my life and how I go about operating now, and now being a working solo parent. I just know that I can. That's not always easy. Some days are really hard, but knowing that I can do it is a big thing.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for those words. And I know they're going to fall on ears that are eager to hear it. Just the podcast alone really helps women understand that there is life past this traumatic event that they're going through. Sometimes it's really hard to understand that life is going to go on and it's not over and it's not ended, that you can continue to pursue those dreams and those goals that you have, even in the midst of adversity. And so thank you so much for sharing everything that you have overcome and taking the time to be really personal with us on today's podcast.
Thank you. And I might want to add, so you can maybe add this in. But one thing that I didn't say is that being a mom, being a parent has been the biggest gift to me. Personally, my kids mean, the world to me. Probably every mom says that. But say that's why I would say I wouldn't do anything differently, because just being a mom has been the biggest reward in my life. And I think that it will always be that way.
Absolutely.
Nothing's going to top that experience.
Absolutely. I definitely agree. Well, thank you so much, Natalie, for sharing your story with us today. And to all of our listeners, we hope to have you back at our next episode of Unplanned and Untold. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Do you want to be a part of an organization that is the first of its kind to empower student moms? Your support can impact generations to come. Consider making a financial contribution at babysteps.org.